The scent of oatmeal and melting chocolate chips filled Carol Peterson's cozy Ohio home. A sweet, warm cloud that clung to the floral curtains and the doilies on the end tables. It was the smell of Tuesday. It was the smell of Lily. Carol pulled the last tray from the oven, her movements practiced and filled with a quiet joy that was reserved for these afternoons. At 68, with a latticework of fine lines around her eyes and knuckles softened by years of baking and gardening, Carol lived for the moments her world shrank to encompass just her and her 5-year-old granddaughter. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway sent a jolt of pure delight through her. She wiped her hands on her apron and hurried to the door, pulling it open before the car had even fully stopped. Lily burst out of the back seat, a tiny whirlwind of pink overalls and untamable blonde hair, a direct inheritance from Carol's late son, Mark. "Grandma!" Lily shrieked, launching herself into Carol's waiting arms. Carol hugged her tight, burying her face in the soft, clean scent of her granddaughter's hair. "There's my little lightning bug. Did you have a good day at school?" "We painted rainbows, but Jenny's rainbow was just all brown," Lily reported with grave importance, holding up hands still faintly stained with blue. Jessica Peterson emerged from the driver's side, a stark contrast to the scene of simple affection. She was tall, elegant, and clad in a tailored blazer that seemed entirely out of place in the suburban driveway. She tapped impatiently at her phone, her perfectly glossed lips set in a tight line. "Don't get paint on Grandma's clothes, Lily, and try not to get grass stains on those overalls. They were expensive." "Oh, let her be a child, Jessica," Carol said, her voice gentle but firm as she led Lily inside. "A little dirt is good for the soul." "A little dirt is another load of laundry I don't have time for," Jessica muttered, following them in. Her eyes swept the comfortable, slightly cluttered living room with a familiar air of faint disdain. Since Mark's passing from a sudden heart attack the year before, Jessica's tolerance for what she considered the mundane artifacts of her married life had evaporated. While Lily attacked a still-warm cookie with gusto, Jessica leaned against the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone. "My boss is hinting about the new regional manager position. It would mean a lot of travel, though. Hard to even think about with all this." She gestured vaguely in Lily's direction without looking up. Carol's heart gave a familiar, painful squeeze. "Mark would have wanted you to be happy, dear. And Lily is a joy, not a burden." "A joy that needs constant supervision," Jessica countered, her voice sharp. "I saw a resort in Cancun online today. Can you imagine? 2 weeks of silence, no sticky fingers, no mommy, watch this. Every 5 seconds. She sighed, a sound of profound self-pity. "I guess that's just not my life anymore." Later, as they played in the backyard, Lily pretended she was a knight defending a castle of lawn chairs from a fearsome dragon, which was Carol in a floppy sun hat. Their laughter echoed in the quiet afternoon. When Jessica's car horn blared, signaling the end of their time, Lily's face fell. "Do I have to go, Grandma?" she whispered, clinging to Carol's leg. "Your mommy's waiting, sweet girl," Carol said, kneeling to look her in the eye. She tucked a stray strand of blonde hair behind Lily's ear. "I'll see you next week, and we'll fight even bigger dragons." Lily hugged her fiercely. "I love you, Grandma. I love you more, my lightning bug." Carol stood on her porch and watched the car pull away, waving until it was just a speck down the road. An unseasonable chill snaked down her spine, a strange and unwelcome premonition that settled like a stone in her stomach. She dismissed it as foolishness, but the feeling lingered long after the scent of cookies had faded. The shrill ring of the telephone tore through the deep silence of Carol's house just after 11 p.m. It was a sound she associated with emergencies, a jolt of adrenaline that had her fumbling for the receiver in the dark. "Hello?" she answered, her voice thick with sleep. "She's gone! Carol, she's gone!" It was Jessica, but her voice was a ragged, hysterical shriek that was almost unrecognizable. "Lily's gone!" The world tilted. "What are you talking about, Jessica? What do you mean, gone?" "She's not in her bed. Her door was open and she's just gone! You have to get over here!" The line went dead. Carol didn't remember putting on her shoes or grabbing her keys. The 2-mile drive to Jessica's sterile modern townhouse passed in a blur of terror. She found the front door wide open, spilling light onto the manicured lawn. Inside, Two uniformed police officers stood in the pristine living room, their presence a jarring intrusion into the quiet suburban night. Jessica was pacing, her hands twisting in her hair, her face a mask of frantic distress. "I checked the whole house, the yard, everywhere. She's just vanished," Jessica cried, rushing toward Carol. One of the officers, a man with a tired face and a name tag that read Davis, approached Carol gently. "Ma'am, did you see Lily today?" "Yes, she was with me all afternoon. I dropped her off around 5. Carol managed, her mind racing. An open window? A door left unlocked? "It's your fault!" Jessica suddenly screamed, her finger pointing at Carol like an accusation. "It's all those stupid stories you tell her! Nights and adventures and running away! You put this in her head!" "Jessica, that's ridiculous!" Carol gasped, wounded. "Is it?" Jessica turned to Officer Davis. "Come on, I'll show you." She led them up the stairs to Lily's bedroom. It was immaculate, a showroom of pink and white, lacking the comfortable chaos of a well-loved child's room. In the center of the perfectly made bed, on a single fluffed-up pillow, was a piece of paper torn from a coloring book. On it, in the clumsy, oversized block letters of a child just learning to write, were 4 words. "Going on an adventure. Bye." Carol stared at the note, her blood turning to ice. It looked like Lily's writing. She recognized the lopsided G and the backward. But it felt utterly wrong. Lily was afraid of the dark. She wouldn't even go to the bathroom at night without a light on. Officer Davis picked up the note, sealed in an evidence bag. His expression shifted from concern to something more procedural. "A note complicates things," he said, his tone softening with professional pity. 9 times out of 10, a child who leaves a note isn't far. They're usually at a friend's house or hiding in a shed down the street. "She's 5 years old," Carol insisted, her voice rising with panic. "She wouldn't just run away." "You'd be surprised, ma'am," the other officer said gently. The investigation shifted focus. An Amber Alert was issued. But the prevailing theory, bolstered by Jessica's tearful, convincing performance about Carol's unhelpful influence, was that of a runaway. They searched the neighborhood, knocked on doors, and peered into bushes with flashlights. But the urgency of a potential abduction case was blunted by the simple, damning note on the pillow. Carol stood helplessly in the flashing red and blue lights, the community's sympathetic gaze already tinged with a hint of blame. She felt a creeping, horrifying sense that she was the only one who understood the truth. Lily did not run away. She was taken. And as she looked at her daughter-in-law, who was now weeping into Officer Davis's shoulder, a cold, dark suspicion began to bloom in the wreckage of her heart. 7 years. The words felt both impossibly long and tragically short. 7 years since Lily's laughter had echoed in the backyard. 7 years of holidays with an empty chair. 7 years of birthdays marked by a single, flickering candle on a cupcake Carol ate alone. The passage of time had etched itself onto Carol's face, silvering her hair and pulling at the corners of her mouth. Her movements were more deliberate now, but her eyes, when she looked at the age-progressed photo of Lily pinned to her corkboard, held the same fierce, unyielding fire. Life had settled into a painful, purposeful rhythm. Mornings were for maintaining the website, finlilypeterson.com, uploading the new photo of what Lily might look like as a 12-year-old, and checking the forums for any hint, any whisper. Afternoons were for volunteering at the local branch of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, where she channeled her grief into helping other families navigate the same hell she lived in every day. She was a fixture there, a quiet, determined woman who understood their pain in a way no one else could. The community of Fairview, Ohio, had long since moved on. The casseroles and sympathetic visits had stopped years ago. Now she was a local tragedy, a ghost story whispered about at the grocery store. The pity in people's eyes had curdled into a kind of weary impatience, as if her refusal to let go was an inconvenience. She was the grieving grandmother, forever trapped in the worst day of her life. Jessica had been the first to move on. Less than a year after Lily vanished, she sold the townhouse and its cold, modern furniture. She'd told the few neighbors she spoke to that the memories were too painful to bear, and that she needed a fresh start. She moved somewhere on the West Coast, severing all ties. She never called, never answered Carol's desperate letters. To Carol, it never felt like an escape from pain. It felt like a getaway. The speed and finality of her departure was a loose thread Carol could never stop pulling at in her mind. The police case was officially dormant, filed away in a cabinet, another unsolved mystery. This evening, Carol sat in her favorite armchair, the one where Lily used to curl up to listen to stories. The house was quiet, the silence a physical presence. She picked up a small silver frame from the end table. It held a photo of her son Mark, his arm wrapped around a grinning 5-year-old Lily at a picnic. Mark's eyes were so full of love for his daughter, a pure, uncomplicated adoration that felt like a beacon from another lifetime. Jessica had never looked at Lily that way, not once. Carol traced the outline of Lily's small face with her finger. Grief was a constant companion, but tonight it felt sharper, heavier. It was the eve of Lily's 12th birthday. "I'm still looking, Mark," she whispered to the photograph, her voice thick. "I know she's out there, and I swear to you, I will never, ever stop until I find her." The promise wasn't just words. It was the fuel that had kept her going for 2,554 empty days. It was the only thing that hadn't been taken from her that night. The letter from the IRS had been sitting on her desk for a week, a beige envelope radiating low-grade dread. An audit. They wanted to review financial records from 8 years ago, related to her late son Mark's estate. With a heavy sigh, Carol finally hauled herself up the creaky pull-down stairs to the attic, a space she'd avoided for years. The air was thick with the smell of dust and forgotten things, a museum of a life that was. She located a stack of banker's boxes labeled with Mark's neat architectural script. "Financials," one read. She pried open the stiff cardboard flaps and began the tedious work of sorting through a decade of a life lived on paper. Tax returns, mortgage statements, car payments. It was mundane, painful work, each signature a fresh reminder of her loss. After an hour, she came to a box labeled "Joint Accounts, Final." This contained the last of the statements from the bank accounts Mark had shared with Jessica. Carol's job was to methodically cross-reference expenditures against declared income, a task so mind-numbing it was almost meditative. She worked her way through the stack, her finger tracing lines of numbers. January, February, March. The months of the year Lily disappeared. Her finger stopped. She blinked, pulling the statement closer under the dim light of the single attic bulb. It was a statement for Jessica's private savings account, which had somehow gotten mixed in with the joint files. The date on the entry was 2 days after Lily had vanished. It wasn't a deposit, it was a wire transfer. Her eyes widened at the amount. $250,000. $250,000? The sum was staggering. Mark had been a successful architect, but they weren't wealthy people. An amount like that would have been life-changing, and it had gone directly into Jessica's private account, not the joint one she shared with her husband's estate. Carol's breath caught in her throat. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic, panicked drumbeat. Then she saw the sender. It wasn't a person, it wasn't a bank. It was an LLC she had never heard of, a string of words that sounded so bland, so corporate, so utterly benign that it was terrifying. New Beginnings Placements, LLC. Carol stared at the name, the letters blurring and sharpening before her eyes. New Beginnings. The phrase echoed with a sickening, cruel irony. The timing, the secrecy of the private account, the enormous, unexplained sum of money, the flimsy note on the pillow, Jessica's crocodile tears, her hurried escape to a new life. It wasn't a random collection of painful facts anymore. It was a sequence, a transaction. The vague, formless suspicion she had harbored for 7 years suddenly solidified into a monstrous, undeniable certainty. Jessica hadn't lost her daughter. She had sold her. The bank statement trembled in Carol's hand. The dusty attic air felt thin, unbreathable. She was holding the receipt. The ghost that had haunted her for 7 years finally had a name, and it was written in cold black ink on a piece of paper she was never meant to find. The bank statement felt like it was burning a hole in her purse. Carol drove with a strange, cold clarity, her hands steady on the steering wheel for the first time in 7 years. She couldn't go to the Fairview police. They had dismissed her then, their minds closed by a child's scribbled note. They would dismiss her now, pat her on the shoulder, and talk about grief and obsession. She needed someone who would listen, someone who would believe. She needed Frank Miller. Frank's bait and tackle shop smelled of lake water, night crawlers, and old coffee. The bell above the door chimed, and Frank looked up from behind a counter cluttered with fishing lures and receipts. He was a man carved from granite and patience, his face a roadmap of his years as a police detective. He'd been Mark's fishing buddy, and one of the few people who, after the initial shock, had never looked at Carol with an ounce of blame. "Carol," he said, his craggy face softening with surprise. "Good to see you. You need some worms for those roses of yours?" "I need your help, Frank," she said, her voice low and tight. She bypassed the pleasantries, pulling the bank statement from her purse and laying it on the counter between a jar of pickled eggs and a spool of fishing line. "I found this in Mark's old files." Frank picked it up, his eyes scanning the document. He was silent for a long time, his brow furrowed in concentration. He noted the date, the amount, and the recipient. Then his gaze settled on the sender. "New Beginnings Placements, LLC," he read aloud, his voice a low rumble. He looked up at Carol, his detective's mind already connecting dots she couldn't see. This wire transfer was 2 days after Lily disappeared. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Carol whispered. "It went into Jessica's private account. She never said a word. She left town a year later and I never heard from her again." Frank leaned back, his expression grim. The friendly shop owner had vanished, replaced by the shrewd, calculating detective he used to be. "The name is too clean, Carol. New Beginnings. It sounds like something someone invents to hide what they're really doing. And $250,000? That's not a gift. That's a payment." He saw the look in her eyes, a desperate, fragile hope mixed with absolute terror. He remembered Mark, so proud of his little girl. He remembered Lily, a firecracker, who had once tried to put a worm in his coffee cup on a fishing trip. The official story had never sat right with him, but he'd had no evidence, no jurisdiction, nothing to go on. Until now. He folded the copy of the statement Carol had made and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "I'm retired, Carol. My access is limited. But I still have a few old passwords that might work, and a few friends who owe me favors." He looked her straight in the eye, his gaze unwavering. "No promises. This is deep off the books. But I'll see what I can find. For Mark. And for Lily." A single tear escaped Carol's eye and traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of profound, aching relief. As she walked out of the bait shop, leaving the smell of earth and water behind, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in 2,555 days. The dangerous, brilliant glimmer of hope. Frank Miller started his search not in the bright world of search engines, but in the murky, gray archives of his past. From the back office of his shop, he dusted off an old laptop and logged into a series of databases using credentials that were technically expired, but which no one had ever bothered to revoke. He started with the shell company. As he suspected, New Beginnings Placements, LLC was a ghost. It was registered in Delaware, a state notorious for its corporate anonymity. It had existed for 3 years, starting just before Lily vanished, and had been formally dissolved 5 years ago, its digital footprint all but erased. The registered address was a mail forwarding service in Wilmington. It was a professional dead end, designed to be exactly that. But Frank hadn't been a detective for 30 years by giving up at the first wall. He shifted his approach. He took the name of the registered agent listed on the LLC's formation documents, a generic name, John Smith, and began cross-referencing it with federal law enforcement bulletins from that time period. He was looking for a pattern, a keyword, a link. For 2 days he found nothing but static. On the 3rd day, he got a hit. The name was mentioned in a sealed FBI case file summary. The operation was codenamed Project Fresh Start. The summary described the dismantling of a sophisticated, high-end illegal adoption ring. This ring didn't snatch children from playgrounds, it was far more insidious. It acted as a broker, connecting wealthy, desperate couples, often those who couldn't pass the rigorous screenings of legal adoption, with parents who were willing to sell their own children. The ring would create counterfeit birth certificates, coach the sellers on how to file false runaway reports, and launder the money through a series of shell corporations. Frank scrolled down the list of known shell companies used by the ring, and there it was. New Beginnings Placements, LLC. His heart began to pound. He used one of his last biggest favors, calling a contact at the DOJ to unseal a specific portion of the case's financial ledger. "I'm looking into a cold case, a personal thing," he'd said, deliberately vague. An hour later, a secured PDF appeared in his inbox. It was a ledger of transactions. He ran a search for the amount, $250,000. A single line item lit up on his screen. Date of transaction, identical to the wire transfer on Carol's statement. Details of placement, 5-year-old female, Caucasian, blonde hair, blue eyes, origin, Ohio. It was a perfect, sickening match. It was Lily. The file contained one more piece of devastating information. The names and last known address of the purchasing family, the Hartfields, residing in an affluent suburb of San Diego, California. Frank leaned back in his chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating the grim set of his jaw. He had it all. The motive, the means, the outcome. He picked up the phone, his hand heavy. Means? He dialed Carol's number, the silence on the other end of the line stretching for a moment before she answered. "Carol," he said, his voice quiet but clear, leaving no room for doubt. "It's Frank. You need to sit down." He took a breath. "I found her. I know where she is. And you were right. It was a sale." The flight to San Diego was a surreal experience for Carol. The clouds outside the small airplane window were a pristine, indifferent white, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions raging inside her. Beside her, Frank was a bastion of calm, his quiet presence a grounding force. He had briefed her on the plan, his voice low and strategic. In his pocket was a tiny, powerful audio recorder. "People like Jessica, they get arrogant," he'd said. "They think they're untouchable. Sometimes, all you have to do is give them a chance to brag." Jessica's home was a marvel of modern architecture, a glass and steel box perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It was a house built to be featured in a magazine, a monument to wealth and taste. When Jessica opened the door, she was the perfect accessory to her home. Sleek, wearing white linen, her face a carefully maintained mask of placid beauty. Her eyes widened in genuine shock when she saw Carol, a flicker of panic quickly replaced by a cold wall of annoyance. "Carol? What in God's name are you doing here?" "We need to talk, Jessica," Carol said, her voice steady as she stepped past her into the cavernous white marble foyer. Frank followed, a silent, imposing shadow. Jessica's eyes darted between them, her composure beginning to fray. "I have nothing to say to you. You need to leave. Now." Carol walked to a minimalist glass coffee table and gently placed a copy of the bank statement on its surface. The black and white document was a jarring intrusion in the colorless room. "I know what you did, Jessica." Jessica glanced at the paper, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, but she held her ground. "I have no idea what you're talking about." $250,000, Carol continued, her voice gaining strength, "from a company called New Beginnings Placements." The name hit Jessica like a physical blow. The color drained from her face. Her carefully constructed facade shattered, the pieces falling away to reveal the ugly, grasping desperation beneath. "You have no idea," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that grew into a scream. "You have no idea what it was like! I was trapped! Mark died and left me with nothing but a mountain of debt and a child I never wanted." She gestured wildly around the opulent room. "She was a ball and chain, holding me back from this, from a life I deserved. That money wasn't a sale, it was my escape. It was my second chance and I took it. What would you have had me do? Rot away in that pathetic little house in Ohio?" Her confession poured out, a torrent of self-pity and bitter resentment. There was no remorse for Lily, no flicker of maternal love, only a bottomless well of anger that her daughter had been an obstacle to her ambition. Carol listened, her heart not breaking, but hardening into a cold, diamond-hard fury. She saw Jessica not as a grieving widow, but as a monster hiding in plain sight. Frank stood silently by the door, his hand in his pocket, the red light of the recorder silently capturing every damning word. When Jessica's tirade finally sputtered out, Carol looked at the woman her son had once loved, now a complete and utter stranger. "She was a child, Jessica. She was your daughter, and you sold her like she was a piece of furniture you no longer wanted. Carol turned without another word and walked out into the bright California sun, leaving Jessica standing alone in the beautiful empty tomb she had bought with the price of her own child. Carol and Frank didn't go to the airport. They drove directly to the downtown headquarters of the San Diego Police Department. In a small, sterile interview room, they laid everything out for a stunned but focused detective. The 7-year-old missing person report, the original bank statement, Frank's meticulously documented investigation into the defunct LLC, and finally, the small digital recorder. Frank pressed play. Jessica's chilling, vitriolic confession filled the quiet room. It was irrefutable. The local police immediately contacted the FBI, given the interstate nature of the crime and its connection to the Project Fresh Start case. The wheels of justice, dormant for so long, began to turn with breathtaking speed. Less than 24 hours later, news footage showed Jessica being led from her glass house in handcuffs, her face a mixture of disbelief and fury. The story of the Ohio mother who sold her daughter and faked a runaway case became a national headline, a shocking tale of greed and betrayal. For Carol, it was just noise. The only thing that mattered was the next step. The authorities handled the situation with extreme delicacy. Child psychologists and FBI agents approached the Hartfield family. They were a childless couple who, through the illegal ring, had received the daughter they'd always dreamed of. They had raised Lily, who they called Chloe, in a loving home, completely unaware of her true origins. Their world was shattered, too. The reunion was arranged at a neutral, private child advocacy center, a building with soft colors and quiet rooms. A kind-faced social worker sat with Carol, gently preparing her. "She's known as Chloe," the woman explained. "She's been told that her birth mother has been found and arrested, and that the people who raised her weren't her biological family. She's 12 years old, Carol. She's scared and very, very confused. We need to go at her pace." Carol nodded, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Then a door opened. A girl stood in the doorway, clutching the arm of a social worker. She was tall and slender, on the cusp of becoming a teenager, but the hair was the same unmistakable shade of honey blonde, and her eyes, wide with fear and uncertainty, were the same piercing blue that Carol saw every time she closed her own. It was Lily. Tears streamed down Carol's face, but she remained seated, remembering the social worker's advice. She didn't rush. She didn't grab. She just let her granddaughter look at her. "Hello, Lily," Carol said, her voice thick with 7 years of unshed tears. "My name is Carol. I'm your grandma." She searched for a bridge, a memory that might span the impossible chasm between them. "A long time ago I used to bake you cookies. Oatmeal chocolate chip. You called them lumpy bumpy cookies." The girl, Lily, stared at her, her expression guarded. For a long moment there was nothing. Then, a tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of something, not quite memory, but a shadow of a feeling, crossed her face. She took a hesitant step into the room, then another. Carol slowly, gently, opened her arms, not in a demand, but in an offering. It was an invitation back to a life that had been stolen from them both. The path ahead would be long, paved with therapy, patience, and rebuilding. But as Lily took one more tentative step forward, under the warm, steady gaze of the woman who had never given up, the 7 years of silence were finally over. A grandmother had her granddaughter back.